Hi everyone. I'm really excited that you're here today for our first annual International IHL Youth Seminar. As you're coming in, please share your name and where you're joining from in the chat, and we will start in just a moment. Okay, I see some people coming in and putting where they're joining from in the chat. So I'm just very briefly going to introduce the project a little bit and kind of what the inspiration for it was and how we started. So first I'll introduce myself. So hi, my name is Kara Elsie, and I've been with the American Red Cross for quite a few years now, mainly working in their international services programs. And in 2023, I was selected to go as a youth delegate to Indonesia to teach international humanitarian law. And while I was there, I got to meet a lot of wonderful, wonderful advocates from many different national societies. And that was kind of the inspiration for this project. I wanted to do something similar to what I experienced in Indonesia, but focused on international humanitarian law. And yeah, that was in the summer of 2023. So this project has been something I've been thinking about and working on for a long time. So I'm really excited that it's finally happening and that you're all here to see it. And yeah, like I said, I've been with the American Red Cross for quite a few years working on their international services programs, and I oversee the IHL and IHL Youth Action Campaign program for the Pacific Division, so kind of the West Coast of America, plus like Alaska and Hawaii. And just briefly before we start with the presentations, we're going to go over the agenda. And so introductions, which is what we're doing right now, that will just take a moment. And then we're going to, the American Red Cross team will briefly introduce IHL, what it is, what the main principles are, which is based off of a course that the American Red Cross does called Even War Has Rules. Then our first Indonesia team will present on healthcare. Then the Bangladesh Red Crescent will present on food insecurity. Ghana will present on environmental protections. Italy, Japan, and Hong Kong will be discussing IHL programs that they have that are focused on youth education. Our second team from Indonesia will be discussing special protections of water. Kenya will be talking about the environment and nuclear weapons. Canada will be talking about sexual and gender-based violence during war. The Kyiv Youth Council will be presenting on youth in IHL education. We will hear from Ukraine on emblem protections. And then lastly, we will have a second presentation from the American Red Cross on IHL in space, which was the American Red Cross's Youth Action Campaign special topic for this year. So all of the youth that are involved in the IHL Youth Action Campaign in America have been really focusing on learning about space law this year. And then finally, Sarah Kokar and I will do a short closing. So without further ado, I will hand it over to the American Red Cross team to present on Even War Has Rules. Very briefly, I will introduce Tejasvini Ramesh. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today, but she's done a lot of really wonderful work with the IHL team, and she's based out of California. And I wanted to acknowledge all the work she did on this project, even though she couldn't present today. So I will now pass it over to Patrick.
Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick. I help with the IHL Yak initiatives in Arizona and New Mexico. Now I'll pass it off to Lauren.
Hi everyone, my name is Lauren. I've been a participant of the International Humanitarian Law Youth Action Campaign for 3 years now, and this past summer, so last summer, I had the opportunity to attend the summit in Washington, D.C., and it was such an enlightening experience where I learned so much, and I hope that I can pass on some of the knowledge to you guys here today. So first, we're going to talk about what international humanitarian law is, and it's crucial that we set a foundation. So as we move on to the next slide, we wanted to discuss a little bit more about the origins of international humanitarian law. Um, And to define international humanitarian law, we define it as the set of laws that govern international armed conflict. And these rules are established in order to protect vulnerable populations and to limit the effects of conflicts, because this helps establish accountability by providing a legal foundation that must be followed in all instances of warfare. This supports humanitarian aid and encourages peace and reconciliation, and they are outlined in rules that are referred to as the rules of war that we study. And within IHL, there are four specific principles that have been established for centuries now, and these principles include limiting unnecessary suffering, distinction, military necessity, and proportionality. But before we go further into detail about what each of these principles are, I wanted to talk about the origin and where IHL actually derives from. And to put it in a shorter summary, this slide contains kind of the rundown of how it can come down to the four Geneva Conventions that were established in 1949. However, these, as well as the additional protocols of 1977, follow a long history that originated with Henry Dunant's discoveries of the atrocities of warfare by witnessing the Battle of Solferino. So from then, from that point on, and through the Hague Conventions and many implementations through governments and worldwide collaboration, it came down to the Geneva Conventions in 1949, where it was consolidated into these four principles, and then they added in a few additional protocols a few decades later to kind of set that legal framework that can be the basis for all countries to follow to ensure that warfare is issuing protection to those who are not involved in warfare, or those who even are, just in the most humanitarian way possible. So next, we're going to move on to the principles of international humanitarian law, and the very first one that we must discuss is military necessity. Military necessity explains that for all instances of warfare, combatants must only engage in military action when it is necessary to defeat the enemy, providing that their objectives are lawful under international humanitarian law's framework. And to put this in another way, it means that all objectives in warfare should contribute effectively to the enemy's military action, and the destruction can only provide a definite military advantage. So it's crucial to understand that military necessity does not grant unlimited power necessarily to military forces, and it does not justify violations of fundamental human rights. So some forbidden acts that would never be allowed under military necessity is targeting civilians or protected people like prisoners of war, and attacks on hospitals or other protected objects can never be allowed. Torture or genocide are also forbidden, as well as the wanton destruction or unjustified collateral damage. So military necessity really establishes kind of the boundaries and the the boundaries, I guess, that you can't pass even in warfare. I'm going to pass it now on to Patrick.
So building on the last principle, let's explore another crucial aspect of IHL, limiting unnecessary suffering. Simply put, this principle forbids tactics and weapons that cause excessive pain and suffering to people caught in war, both soldiers and civilians. A well-known example is the ban on chemical and biological weapons introduced by the 1925 Geneva Convention after the devastating consequences of World War I. Equally important is the principle of distinction, which requires that all parties involved in a conflict clearly differentiate between combatants and civilians, as well as between military objectives and civilian objectives. Strict adherence to this principle is crucial to protecting civilian populations and minimizing unintended harm during conflicts. And closely tied to this principle is the principle of proportionality. It emphasizes careful consideration and mandates that combatants must avoid actions likely to cause excessive civilian casualties or damage relative to the anticipated direct military advantage. This principle ensures a balanced approach to military actions, safeguarding civilians and civilian structures from disproportionate harm. So why does international humanitarian law matter, and why are these principles crucial? Although war inevitably brings casualties and destruction, IHL offers vital rules to mitigate its devastating impact. The principles of IHL work collectively to limit unnecessary deaths, especially among civilians, protect civilian infrastructure, and safeguard the environment. Fundamentally, IHL preserves humanity amidst inhumanity. And we will now transition to our special topic segment. I'm honored to pass it off to the Indonesian Red Cross, who will provide valuable insights on healthcare during conflict.
Okay, hello guys. So now we are in the section of healthcare in war. So healthcare in war protecting by Indonesian Red Cross. So this is a little bit about my biography. Gonna read this. So my full name is Muhammad Gasan Yadin, but also you can call me San. And I'm a volunteer with the Indonesia Red Cross or PMI or in Riau Province, Indonesia. And I'm 10th grade student in Plus Senior High School in Riau Province, Indonesia. And I am a leader of high school Red Cross in my club. And I will be attending my junior year in United States because I am a finalist of KLES program by U.S. Department for a year of 2025 to 2026. And I hope I will be in medicine's college for the future. And in 2023, I was attending a Jumbara by a PMI by Youth Camp, the place where I meet my friend from American Red Cross. So this is a little bit about me. So let's talk about what does IHL say about healthcare. So according to International Humanitarian Law or IHL, health establishment and unit, including hospital, should not be attacked. Its protection extends to the wounded and sick as well as to medical staff and means of transport. The rule has few exceptions. Next. So what kind of special protections are the sick and wounded provided during international armed conflicts? In time of armed conflicts, the wounded and sick include anyone, whether military or civilian, who need medical attention and is not or no longer taking part in hostility. Under international humanitarian law or IHL, all wounded and sick, no matter what party they belong to, enjoy general right to be respected, not to be subject to attack, killing, or ill treatment, protected, a right to be assisted and shielded from harm against third parties, searched for and collected, carried for without distinction based on grounds other than medical ones. Okay, so though IHL allows to search for, collect, and provide care as far as practicable, in other words, taking into consideration the security conditions and the means available, a lack of resources doesn't justify inactions. Even in case where such resources are limited, state and non-state parties to a conflict must accomplish their best efforts to ensure medical care to the wounded and the sick. Possibly, they must provide wounded and sick with the best possible care as quickly as possible. This includes permitting impartial humanitarian organization to provide medical care when the needs of the wounded and sick are not fulfilled. Consent to the work of this organization must not be refused arbitrarily. The protection provided to the wounded and sick will have little meaning of medical personnel, medical units, and establishments such as hospital and medical means of transport were subject to attack. Therefore, IHL extends specific protections to them. Parties to a conflict must respect them while they are performing an exclusively medical function and must not unduly interfere with their work so as to allow them to treat the wounded and sick. So now, can hospital lose their special status? Specific protections of medical establishment and units, including hospital, is the general rule under IHL. Therefore, specific protection to which hospitals are entitled shall not case unless they are used by a party to the conflict to commit, outside their humanitarian functions, and act are harmful to the enemy. In case, in a doubt of the whether medical units of establishment are used to commit an act harmful to the enemy, they should be presumed not to be so used. The expressions act harmful to the enemy is not defined under IHL. This body of law merely singles out a few acts expressly recognized as not being harmful to the enemy, such as the carrying or using an individual light weapon in self-defense or defense of wounded and sick, armed guarding or a medical facility, or the presence in a medical facility of sick of wounded combatants no longer taking part facilities. Next. So we're taking a case study in Rwanda. An extraordinary example of success in ensuring respect for the sanctity of a hospital, its personnel and patients, occurred in the Rwanda capital, Kigali, during the 1994 genocides. As the organized slaughter of the Tutsi minority continued relentlessly for 3 months, the ICRC team saved 10,000 lives in a compound protected only by the Red Cross flag. They ventured onto the streets to collect the wounded, with only their badge, their courage, and the strength of their argument to prevent the wounded from being from the back of ambulance. Now, case study in Rwanda counts. The hospital was threatened several times and was damaged by rocket fire more than once, but was never forcibly entered by those scouring the city for more victims. It even inspired some killers to stop before fleeing the city when they know they were defeated. Some militiamen proved that Tutsi nurse they had helped for the last 3 months to the hospital to release her. We have decided not to kill her, despite the fact that she is a Tutsi. They said to the head of the ICRC's delegations, Philip Gellert, as a nurse, she will be more useful in your hospital than die. So we now continue about case study in reducing polio in conflict zones. For over 20 years, major efforts have been underway to eradicate the devastating disease of polio. Enormous progress has been made in reducing the transmission and number of cases worldwide. But violence in a few key countries is a major obstacle to its total eliminations. In 2 of the 4 countries with endemic polio, Pakistan and Afghanistan, for the example, vaccination coverage is hampered by fighting or a lack of security guarantees that will enable vaccination teams to reach all areas of polio transmissions. Military offensive also cause populations displacement that can spread the disease from infected to uninfected areas. The province of Punjab in Pakistan, which had been polio-free for 2 years, experienced an outbreak in 2008 following the influx of people fleeing violence in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and the federally administrated tribal areas. Now, case study reducing polio in conflict zone. 100,000 of children remain beyond reach in parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan. In 2007, the Afghan Health Ministry and the World Health Organization asked the ICRC to use its unique contacts with the armed oppositions in Afghanistan to negotiate safe passage for polio vaccination. Although some areas remain inaccessible, the opposition's agreement to this plan enabled the country-wide vaccination campaign to resume coverage has dramatically increased. Sorry, can we back in the Colombia? Okay, now it's Colombia counts to improve her safety and that of thousands like her all around Colombia, the ICRC's weapons contaminations team trains healthcare workers in techniques to help them avoid driving over or stepping on explosive device. They learn what to look out for and what to do when hit by or in the midst of these deadly objects. The ICRC also talks to all sides in the conflicts about the consequence of these weapons for civilians. So now we have in the works cited and count, you can see it. And thank you for your time. So thank you so much. Now we can continue with the Bangladesh team by food insecurity. They will prepare it. Thank you so much. Good evening.
Hello everyone, am I audible? Can anyone respond please? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to today's fourth session of the first annual International IHL Youth Summit. Today, I'm going to present on food insecurity. It will take not more than 10 minutes. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Shithi Nabila, and Red Crescent Youth and National Disaster Watch Team member from Bangladesh Red Crescent Society. I'm also a Deputy Youth Chief of in our district, Lalmarhat Red Crescent Youth. I have been working as a volunteer since 2015, and in 2021, it was my proud moment to receive the Best Volunteer Award from National Headquarters of Bangladesh. So now we will move into our presentation, which is about food insecurity. To introduce food insecurity, we need to find out the definition. What is food insecurity? The definition is taken here from Feeding America. It is a term that refers to when people don't have enough to eat and don't know where their next meal will come from. This leads to the reasons that makes the food insecurity. The conflicts drives food insecurity. Well, during armed conflicts, civilians cannot survive from long without food and water. And yet, conflict drives food insecurity as a result of how warring parties wage their battles and the disruption and degradation of food systems. Starving civilians as a method of warfare. This method is absolutely prohibited under international humanitarian law. In this regard, IHL sets out a non-exhaustive list of objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, which benefit from heightened protection, foodstuffs, agricultural areas, crops, livestock, drinking water installation and supplies, and irrigation works. It is prohibited to attack, destroy, remove, or otherwise render useless these objects except for in very exceptional circumstances. While there are many interconnected drivers of food insecurity, armed conflicts are the main drivers. The 2023 Global Report on Food Crisis suggests that conflicts pushed over 117 million people into acute food insecurity, followed by only economic shocks. It is 84 million, and weather extremes that was over 56 million. On the next slide, we have a question that does international humanitarian law provide tools to avert food insecurity and famine? Well, yes, it does. All four of the IHL principles provide restrictions that relate to food insecurity and employing weapons and tactics that are intended or may be expected to cause widespread long-term and severe damage to the natural environment is strictly prohibited. In addition, IHL prohibits or restricts use of a range of weapons that can have widespread and long-lasting negative impacts on food security. These include prohibitions of poison, biological and chemical weapons, restrictions on use of herbicides herbicides as weapon, and prohibitions and restrictions on use of landmines, cluster munitions, and nuclear weapons. As well, employing weapons and tactics that are intended or may be expected to cause widespread long-term and severe damage to the natural environment is strictly prohibited. However, there we go to our next question, that who is responsible for providing food and water to the civilian population? Well, each party to an armed conflict has primary responsibility for ensuring that the basic needs of population under its control are met, including adequate food and water supply. This requires a strong understanding of the food systems a country or community relies upon and how food insecurity and malnutrition affects different groups in different ways. However, IHL However, IHL recognizes a need for humanitarian assistance in certain circumstances. It sets down that impartial humanitarian organizations may offer their services to carry out humanitarian activities, including when a party is not able or willing to meet these needs in practice. The ICRC's call to action on food security. We will be discussing three things here, and these are: first, in conflict, parties to the fighting have the primary responsibility to ensure the basic needs of civilians in areas under their control are met. They must protect uh, crops, livestock, water structures, and health facilities indispensable to the survival of the population. This includes facilitating rapid and unimpeded humanitarian access. In the second, funding to address the food crisis must be increased immediately to save lives. However, long-term actions to manage risks and strengthen resilience is also critical to prepare for the next crisis. We must ensure assistance reaches those affected by conflict and support climate-smart agriculture and pastoralist practices. In the third and final, meeting the scale of needs in the short, medium, and long-term calls for leveraging the capacities of entities ranging from humanitarian and development agencies to financial institutions and local and regional authorities. Well, in the next slide, food security is about more than food. We have a quotation here, and that is: beyond the impact of local fighting, food insecurity can result directly and indirectly from broader social and economic knock-on effect of conflict in other countries, which have local, national, and transitional dimensions. Inflation and currency depreciation, and in some cases sanctions, can rapidly increase food prices, decrease people's purchasing power, and disrupt local, regional, and global food supply chains. This insecurity caused by local conflict, notably displacement and the erosion of community ties, can also alter established livelihoods, trade, agricultural, and pastoral practices, as well as the availability of crisis coping mechanism among communities. These problems are compounded by pre-existing poverty and insufficient, inexistent, or inaccessible economic safety nets. Well, in our next slide, We have the work cited here, and here my presentation ends. Thank you everyone for keeping your patience. And now I want to invite our volunteer from Ghana to share his presentation with us. Thank you everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Shiti Nabila of Bangladesh Red Cross. That was a thoughtful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Abdi Razak from Ghana Red Cross Society. I am the youth president of Ghana Red Cross Society and also the West Coast youth chair of the African Cluster of National Societies. I'm also proud to share that I was fortunate to also be awarded with the Henry Davidson Award just ended the IHL International Conference that happens in Geneva. Before I start, colleague volunteers and members from other national societies, I want to ask or plead so that we can take a moment of silence for our colleague Mahdi, the Tayo of the Iranian Red Cross, that lost his life in serving humanity. And this is due to the complete disrespect to the IHL, the international humanitarian laws, because it has been disregarded, disrespected, it's not being followed. So let's take a moment of silence for our colleague Mahdi Zataji, who lost his life in serving humanity. May his soul rest in perfect peace. My presentation will be on IHL and environmental protection, youth leading the charge. I'm not going to spend my time because my colleagues from the American Red Cross has already spoken much on the IHL, what it is and what it does and all that. So I'm just going to touch on some of the other aspects that has not been touched on, and I'm going to go as quick as possible. So the intertwined fate of conflict, humanity, and nature of IHL and the factors around it. Now let's see armed conflict. We're going to look at three aspects here: the armed conflict, its environmental ruin, and the humanitarian crisis that is causing. Now, with armed conflict, you see that wars devastate communities, they destroy lives and infrastructure. Conflict also damages the environment, ecosystems suffer greatly, and then also environmental damage create new crises. It impacts human beings as well, because we realize the majority of the disasters that we are fighting now are human-created. And then it's as a result of disrespect, complete disrespect and disregard to the IHL. Let's move to the next slide. Yes, with this side, what is the international humanitarian law, of which the American Red Cross has already? So we just look at the key principles of environmental protection, which is the military necessity. Actions must be essential for military objectives. Unnecessary harm is prohibited by the international humanitarian law. Proportionality, harm must not outweigh military gain. Civilian suffering should be minimized. Yeah, distinction, combatant must differentiate targets, civilians and the nature are protected. IHL sets rules for warfare. It aims to limit suffering. Key principles apply to environmental protection. The environmental harm as a consequence of armed conflict. Stark reality. Land degradation. Heavy weapons disrupt soil. It ruins agricultural land. This causes food shortages, which implies to it's have a complete connection from my colleague that just presented before me. Because when this environment is being disrupted, it kind of causes food shortages, which leads to global crisis. Water contamination. Chemicals pollute water sources. This leads to disease. It affects human health. Habitat destruction. Forests are cleared for resources. Wildlife habitat are lost. Biodiversity suffers. And armed conflict causes widespread of environmental destruction. This includes pollution, resource depletion, and ecosystem damage. These impacts are often outlast the conflict itself. Next slide. IHL specific provisions for environmental protection during warfare. Now, these are some of the provisions that are the IHL that are completely, disregarded, which we as young persons have to lead the charge in advocating for global organizations, the people that are actors in our society and in higher organizations, so that we could have a full implementation and full respect to them. People should be accountable to some of these things. The first one, which is the NMOD Convention, it prohibits hostile environmental modification techniques. Additional Protocol 1 protects the natural environment against widespread, long-term, and severe damage. Customary IHL, extend protection beyond treaties. It prohibits environmental attacks. IHL contains specific rules. They aim to protect the environment. These provisions prohibit severe environmental damage during armed conflict. Next slide, please. We are to look at these case studies of environmental damage in conflict zones and IHL applications. Let's go back to history, look at the Gulf War. We have a massive oil spills, okay? Burning oil wells, release toxins. This caused severe air and marine pollution. The Balkan conflict, 1990s, industrial targets were bombed. This released hazardous waste, rivers are contaminated, ongoing conflict, resource exploitations, force wars, deforestation and mining increase, environmental regulations are ignored. This, in many ways, we know some of them that are happening right now. We have to really preach much against. Next slide. The crucial role of youth in promoting and protecting the environment and the IHL. Now, this is kept into a pyramid because, I want to really touch on it. What role do we have to play as young persons? What should we do? Now, the first one is action. Youth lead restoration effort, this implement projects. This one is key because we as young people, we have to lead the charge. Distractions has already been caused, damage has been caused, and it still even continues. Let's go to different places. Name them. Ukraine and other places where you have, thank you, where we have these distractions happen. Youth have to take charge, lead charge, and make sure. Can we go back to the last slide, please? I'll still explain one of them. Thank you very much. Yeah. So you have to lead a charge in the added efforts to restoration of the damages that are caused to Mother Earth. Now, education, we have to spread knowledge. We have to teach IHL principles. I think this is one of the things that we, as Ghana Red Cross Society, is learning from the American Red Cross, to take frameworks to go into schools to educate young people on IHL principles and how we can better, and that leads us to the advocacy, where we as young people have to raise awareness and advocate for change. Now we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Youth-led initiatives, example of environmental advocacy and action in conflict areas. Documentations, yes, of course, youth have to take the petitions and all that, take pictures and all that. Community mobilizations, yes, we have to mobilize, cleanup campaigns and all that. Digital campaigns, at least I think this is one of the major ones. This conference that starts now, and I want to believe that going forward, Kara Elsie, I believe the next one we should be having should be a physical one. We should try and find a way of doing it so that we can loud this thing, so that people will know that, yes, Red Cross members and volunteers, young people, yes, we have the voice. We are tired of whatever that is happening to us. The complete disregard and disrespect to the international humanitarian law must end. This must stop. Volunteers are dying on a day-to-day basis in the field. People are dying. The number keep increasing. So we have to do something. And I think next, yes, conclusion. These are my conclusion remarks about the empowering youth to champion environmental protection, IHL, education, which we've already mentioned, we have to integrate IHL and environmental studies, build foundation of knowledge, support, provide resource for youth initiatives, offer mentorship and funding, of which the American Red Cross and the CAL is doing, because they helped us to get a framework. They helped us to get a curriculum for our schools. That is the support we are asking for. So we think this should be amplified more. Bangladesh Red Cross should, yes, be able to help Japan. Japan should be able to help Nigeria. We have to connect this. We are not too young to make a difference. It's already happening. So let's connect more. We have advocacy whereby, and we can have different ways of doing that. I remember when I was in Geneva, I launched an advocacy for us to do a campaign on the internet. We have to, because our voice is not too small to make a change. So we have, as young people, it's essential for our future and environmental protection by us. We have to foster and understand IHL and also try to let it go so that people can know it more. Next. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasing pleasure. I now hand over the mandate to the Italian Red Cross to talk about the IHL youth, IHL youth, IHL youth programs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea. I'm from the Italian Red Cross. You can see that because I'm moving a lot my hands. Thanks a lot to the American Red Cross for inviting us here. I also bring the greetings for all the national society, our national society, to also all your national societies. But let's start. It's with great pleasure that I have the opportunity to speak to you today about the Gara project. It's an initiative by the Italian Red Cross aim to promoting and disseminating international humanitarian law among young people, in particular like high school students in the last years. In a world where conflicts and humanitarian crises continue to affect millions of lives, understanding the principles that govern the protection of individuals during times of war is more important than ever. So this project strives to bring these principles to life in a way that is like engaging, informative, and also impactful for the younger generation. Once the local Red Cross committees reach out the schools, the project begins with a series of theoretical lessons. You can also go like in the next slide. In this lesson, we provide like students with a deep understanding of the key and rules of IHL. So they explore a variety of topics, such as like treatment of war, the role of ICRC delegates, like the of like the international tribunals. So we have like different topics. Only after these lessons, the students participate in the first stage of the competition at the regional level. That is not just a test of knowledge, it's like a challenge to see how well they apply what they have learned in practical scenarios. So after that, in the next slide, after like the regional winners of like all the regional competitions move on the national phase that sometimes like almost every time is held in Rome, and they compete against the best team from all over the country in like a simulating experience, and also is like a unique opportunity to deepen their understanding of IHL. And it's crucial, of course, to know like how is like the situation in the world today. This project does not like simply aim to teach young people the rule of IHL, but is like it strives to instill in them the values of humanitarians, empathy, and the importance of also human dignity, regardless of nationality, background, or circumstance. These values are the heart of the International Red Cross movement, and they are essential for shaping a new generation that will one day take the responsibility to build a new future and new peaceful world. It is inspiring to see how many individuals every year come together, not only to compete, but also to learn and to grow through the experience, through like the challenges. And Garadio is not only a project, it's like not only a competition, a project, is like an investment in the future of like young generation, and not only young generation, to all the community. We're doing that through like also some trainings that are like involved for the national society, for like the volunteers of the national society. We divide like in three kinds of trainings, like introductional IHL courses, like for all the volunteers in the national society, where we aim to let them understand how is work in the national society, like the activities through youth and not only youth. We doing also like courses to all trainings to all the volunteers, but also in a specializing way. So every year, like people from around Italy, they meet for 2 weeks and they do like a training. They will do this training every year about IHL. And after that, in the next slide, we can see that we are doing like some kind of different specialization in all the activities that we are doing. So the trainings are connecting to the activities. If you like want to do like the Garadio that we saw before, you have to do also training to let like learn also the volunteers, and not only the volunteers, also like the kids and the guys in the high schools. But it's not only that, we also doing Red Cross activities. Red Cross is like a role play game that involved IHL and all various scenarios. That is also that for like the high school projects. We are doing also different kind of things, not only of like schools projects, but also to the community in general. So not only youth, but we are doing that through like the healthcare in danger, international disaster law, protection of the emblem, protection of cultural heritage. That is really important in Italy, of course, for the history that we have, and also the monuments and the historical place that we want to protect. And of course, principles and values and nuclear experience. But the main project in the next slide we can see are the Gara-DU that we saw before, that is the main project for youth right now about like IHL, Right Cross that I talked before, and also Peace Education. Peace Education is like a campaign that we are doing through different activity about discrimination, racism, and many other like topics, and is really connected sometimes with IHL and in general like humanitarian law. Thank you a lot for having us. Thank you. If you need like to know more about our national society, you can take the email there. And now we're gonna pass it to the Japanese Red Cross.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm Aki from the Japanese Red Cross Youth. Listening to your presentations, I was once again reminded that while the complete elimination of armed conflict is the ultimate goal, it is also crucial for youth to learn about the international humanitarian law, raise awareness about it, and advocate for its full implementation. I reaffirmed my commitment to continuing these efforts within Japan. The next slide, please. Thank you. Today, I'd like to introduce a youth-led project for promoting IHL awareness in Japan. First, let me explain the situation, current situation. It means our challenges, actually. Unfortunately, among youth in Japan, IHL promotion is not being actively pursued across the board. In certain regions and by certain individuals, however, these are very dedicated efforts. For example, major cities such as Tokyo and Osaka, as well as places heavily affected by World War II, like Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Okinawa, names some of you may be familiar with, actively engaged in this work. That said, in most other prefectures, if we complete disaster preparedness and IHL promotion, many Red Cross youth volunteers seems to be more focused on disaster related activities. However, given the current global situation and the recent international conferences, and having heard about the impressive initiatives by the American Red Cross youth, I feel strongly that we must also promote IHL here in Japan. In fact, many youth volunteers across Japan have shared this feeling, even if only subconsciously. As a result, following last year's National Youth Council in my national society, a new youth-led project was launched. Today, I've invited one of the core members of that project to speak with us. Haruka, could you please give us an introduction, please?
Okay, hello. I'm Haruka. I'm a member of Japanese Red Cross Youth Volunteer. We have set up a new IHL dissemination project in cooperation with JRC Youth Volunteers in 4 prefectures in Japan. This project will inform our generation about the importance of IHL compliance by the international community and at the same time provide an opportunity for Red Cross youth to think about the need to proactively promote IHL in Japan. 4 things were important in this project. The first was to refer to existing teaching materials. As we are not experts, so we choose this method in order to get the maximum effect based on accurate information. Second, it is widely open to Red Cross use for all over Japan. The third is that the program should be a reflection of the youth themselves on why it is necessary to disseminate knowledge of IHL in Japan, a country that is not currently at war. IHL is important, will not reach the hearts and minds of the participants. We are pleased to report that the first outcome of the project, a study day for Red Cross volunteers in the 4 prefectures, was held last month. We have also referred to materials from the American Red Cross and the ICRC when creating these study groups. We we should like to thank all those who helped us. And finally, it is about creating an environment in which it is easy to take action. Please go back slide. Thank you. For example, last month at the end of the study session, all participants created a post for social networking campaign. Next slide, please. Thank you. Finally, I would like to share with you what we want to do in the future. There are organizations and experts within the JRCS and in Japan who are working on IHL and abolition of nuclear weapons. We will work with them in the future, their understanding of IHL and the importance of faithfully implementing it. In Japan, I would also like to learn about topics related to IHL that are possible only in Japan, such as learning at the Atomic Bomb Museum, so that I can present them at learning sessions with youth from around the world, such as today. Our efforts have only just begun, but we will continue to communicate the importance of profiling IHL to our generations in order to reduce the number of civilians suffering from armed conflict as much as possible. I'll finish our presentation. Thank you. Next, please give a presentation from Hong Kong. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Tiffany and I'm the Humanitarian Education Activity Assistant of our East Carolina Division. So I'm going to share my experience on promoting IHL and Hong Kong youth units, which are the secondary school students. And our humanitarian education activities are both on the wider Hong Kong level and also district divisional level. But today I'm going to share with you focusing on the Hong Kong level IHL events. So I'm going to cover my experience as the organizing committee for the IHL Youth Mood and also what we call the role play game, as well as a little bit on Red Cross, which is very interesting, I think. Next slide, please. So IHL is a big word even for law school students or like lawyers. So the Youth Development Service in Hong Kong try to offer activities that aims to provide a more interactive and immersive experience to introduce youth units to IHL in a fun way, with a hope to encourage participation and also to engage more students. And there's like a big goal is to hope to have a full cycle where students then are empowered with IHL knowledge and interest, where then they become the future leaders that help with promoting IHL. Next slide, please. So the IHL Youth Mood actually happens every 2 years, and because of the very positive feedback, it might become an annual event. And the idea was actually from the IHL Mood, which you might have heard of. It's a mood competition for APAC Uni law students, and the Youth Mood is what we organize for the secondary school students. And we take the IHL mood problem and simplify it to focus on 2 to 3 IHL principles and concepts. And in 2025, we have the topic which is on the use of autonomous weapons, which we think really fit with the AI and tech background these days and might have more interest from the youth units. And with the format, there are workshops where after each there are quizzes to make sure the youth units are on the right track. And then there's also a taster days for adult volunteer with the opportunity to become a mentor later on the mood. And of course, there's the main mood competition. So within the organizing committee, I'll share a little bit more where we discuss very heavily on whether we want to give more guidelines to the team, for example, to point them to very specific IHL concepts so that their performance and competition will definitely be on track, or whether we want to actually give students more room to think, analyze, and apply what they learn in the workshop. And because the overall aim is for a student to have a more realistic experience and think more, we don't want the mood to be a purely classroom-based learning. where they just literally copy and read out what we deliver to them. The mood was more designed to give room for thinking and debate. So the organizing committee opted for like a more open-ended format. And the mood question was designed to be arguable, both sides for prosecution and also the defendant, to inspire the students to think more on different IHL topic. For example, we like the team to decide which IHL concept they want to mainly rely their argument on, and they have to analyze different facts and evidence from the mood problem. It touched upon a different concept, for example, the principle of distinction between combatants and civilians, and where they have to really think about the concept of direct participation in hostilities and analyze holistically what action might constitute participation in hostility and making civilians temporarily lose their protection from IHL. For example, are throwing rocks at tanks, would that consider direct participation? And then also touch upon a little bit on principle of precaution. What is considered enough precautions? And the teams are required to argue based on different evidence that are contained in the mood problem. Next slide. Yeah. And each team was paired up with both a humanitarian mentor and legal mentor, where the youth unit gets to discuss and explore IHL with the guidelines from IDL members or volunteers with IHL experience and also current legal practitioner. And there are mainly 2 rounds of competition, and those who advance to the final round will have the opportunity to participate in the formal mood with the current Hong Kong judges. This is like a very special experience, and the teams would involve acting as prosecutor or defense depending on their jury result. And they also role play as defendant and witnesses to have the opportunity to do cross-examination. And as mentioned before, because the goal of the U move is for teams to think about and apply IHL, so the judge will judge based on both humanitarian, IHL, and also legal aspect. And to engage more students, we also want to make it fun. So there's actually a live voting for the most trustworthy witness award by the audience. So we actually have a lot of teams that invite their friends and family to the final round of mood. And we have very good feedback each year from the teams, volunteers, or the Hong Kong judges, because it's not only like one-off event that sort of happen in one day or an afternoon, but there's like a continuation from workshops and then quizzes. There's like a progression to a competition, which is like a showcase for the students. And even for the adults, they have a taster session of debate and then they can become a mentor. And most students are actually first timer in joining a mood effort, but you can really see that they put in a lot of effort, and some even have friendly mood with different teams before the competition. And there's a lot of teamwork involved, and the competition format actually give very clear goal and incentive for the team to be more engaged. And then we're very happy to know that a few of the humanitarian mentors are actually past mood participants. So actually, we achieved what we want in promoting IHL. And next slide, please. And then I'm going to move on to talk about what we call RPG, which is like a role play game that also happen every 2 years. So different from the youth mood, there are actually more on the application of IHL and skills without all the legal formalities when compared with the mood. It's like a more like an IHL escape room game that we try to make it as realistic as possible. So the students would get to role play as ICRC personnel in conflict areas, and same as the mood, it also involves some workshops where students are introduced to the concepts of IHL and also some key things to note when they are acting as ICRC personnel in conflict areas. So for the recent years, role play game, there were 3 stations where teams have to make instant decision, and it really showed that they were able to learn and digest all the IHL concepts, as there were like no time to prepare in advance, like a mood court where you can prepare your speech. You literally in a role play game, you walk in with your teammates, and then the mission would then begins. So there is 3 stations. First one is passing through 2 military checkpoints where students have the chance to use walkie-talkie, which they really love. And then they have like a backpack provided where they have to think about like what they should or should not bring to the mission. And the second station would be visiting detainees. It checks on whether students are actually aware of the principle of confidentiality, which is a key of ICRC's work, in order to request interviews in private. And then we also have people like dressing up, putting on makeup or scars, which test the student whether they can observe whether there's any ill treatment to detainees, and then whether they observe are there like separate quarters for women and men and adult and children. And the final station is to establish a humanitarian corridor. The aim is to see if the teams could understand the role of ICRC and negotiate effectively. And then throughout the game, you can actually see all the teams just apply what they learn. And because of the game format, it's sort of become a core memory for them, and they just won't simply forget about IHL after the workshops, which I think is like a really good activities. So on the next slide, you can see some of the photos that we took during the roleplay games. We make it realistic, so they're like as if they're actually being in the conflict zone. And then the next slide, at the end, we want to talk a bit on Red Cross, which is open to the public. So all secondary schools in Hong Kong, they can apply for this 2 hours experience where all the participants will be assigned a different role in conflict, for example, like soldiers or rescuer, and then they have to respond also instantly to some dilemma. And then the goal, same as the youth mood and RPG, is for participants to understand people affected by war and the situation that they face, understand their basic rules of IHL. And from that, hopefully, we can facilitate the understanding of the importance and role of IHL, for example, in protecting humans' basic rights and dignity, which is a big part of Red Cross work in Hong Kong. Because in Hong Kong, you often feel like war is really far away. And also IHL, as I said, is like a very grand word. So hopefully these workshops and it's like a more fun and relaxing experience are the ways that we hope to introduce IHL to the youth units, give them like an introduction, raise their interest and encourage their understanding. We want them to talk about IHL with their friends. So hopefully at the end, we achieve the goal to promote the full cycle engagement where students can join as a participant and then they grow into a leader later on, being a mentor and also leading some other students in the future. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass on to the next speaker now.
Okay, hello everyone. Am I audible?
Yeah,
We
sure.
can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone. I come from Indonesian Red Cross Society. I'm here with my partner, want to present and discuss about water rights under IHL and non-IHL in war. Okay, please, next slide. Okay, meet our team before discussion session. I'm here, Arli Fatina Bila. I come from eastern side of the world, where the sunshine is shining brightly every day, even every second. Yeah, I come from Indonesia, especially Central Java. I'm an Indonesian Red Cross Society volunteer, and also I'm a first year law student in the University of Indonesia, and with my partner, Bar, and also he is a first year law student in the University of Indonesia too. Okay, please, next slide. About water is essential. You guys will have discussion session with Bar. Okay, go on, Bar.
Okay, let's start it. Water is essential. According to Geneva Water Hub, ensuring access to water, a fundamental human right, is imperative even in the midst of armed conflict. International humanitarian law, IHL, provides a solid basis from its protection during the conduct of hostilities. However, water is rarely spared from the ravages of combat. People's livelihoods may be severely compromised as economic opportunities become scarce and waterborne diseases abound. Next. Okay, the weaponization of water in war. According to the water conflict chronology from Pacific Institute, there is an increasing trend of using water as means or method of warfare in contemporary armed conflicts. Water has been employed both defensively to impede the advance of enemy force, offensively to target enemy position, and as strategic targeting for a political, social, or economic objective. Numerous reports have also documented incidental or deliberate destruction of water systems and contamination of water resources during armed conflict. This conduct have devastating direct and indirect impact on civilian and the environment. Next. Okay, The direct impact includes damage to water treatment plants, pipelines, and reservoirs, leading to immediate disruption in water supply. In conflict situations, having access to water is increasingly a matter of survival. And then the indirect impact include the spread of waterborne disease, livelihoods disruption, food insecurity, displacement, and environmental degradation. Moreover, this impact can accumulate from the successive beginning of resilience to the repeated attack or protected armed conflicts. This cumulative impact also leads to reduced community resilience and complicate post-conflict peacebuilding. Protection of water is therefore essential for restoring peace and stability. More broadly, as protecting water is protecting civilians, understanding and addressing this impact is crucial. Okay. Next presentation will be explained by Fatin.
Okay, thank you, Bar. After we got the introduction about water rights under IHL, we will talk about what are the legal protection of water under IHL. So the protection given to civilians and civilian objects under IHL are non-negotiable, with multiple layers of safeguards extending to water and water infrastructure. A fundamental principle of IHL states that the right of the parties to an armed conflict to choose methods or means of warfare is not unlimited. It also prohibits the use of poison or poisoned weapons when they are intended or designed to kill or injure humans, including contamination of wells and water supplies. During the conflict, all parties must respect the principles of distinction, proportionality, and limiting unnecessary suffering. This principle extends to ensuring the protection of water infrastructure and water-related installation. As per the principle of distinction, they benefit from the protection accorded to civilian objects and hence must be spared from attacks, including indiscriminate attacks. They also benefit from a presumption of civilian statehood. Since the 1929 Geneva Convention on the Prisoners of War, IHL protects the access to water to specific categories of people. Under current IHL, access to water must be answered to all the civilians as well as prisoners of war, wounded, and even sick. Okay, please, next slide. Continues from the back slide. Under IHL, there are two main prohibitions protecting water. The prohibition to attack, destroy, remove, or render useless objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, and the ban on attacking works or installations containing dangerous forces such as dams and ditches. Apart from the rules, the provision of the 1977 first additional protocol to the Geneva Convention dealing with the protection of the environment are also worth noting to ensure the protection of water resource. Okay, please, next slide. We will talk about special protection of water under IHL. Okay, IHL offers special protection for certain objects, including works and installation containing dangerous forces, namely dams, ditches, and nuclear electrical generating station and the natural environment. It also prohibits some specific methods of warfare, such as starvation of the civilians population, and the prohibition against attacking, destroying, removing, or rendering useless objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, such as drinking water installation and supplies and irrigation work. Okay, please, next slide. We will talk about consent care. IHL further obligates parties to a conflict to take constant care to spare water resources and water infrastructure. Those who plan, decide upon, and execute attacks must do everything feasible to verify that these are military objectives and that is not prohibited to attack them. Moreover, the parties must take all feasible precautions to protect water and water infrastructure under their control against the effect of attack. They should also avoid locating military objects in the vicinity of water infrastructure. Okay, please next slide. We will discuss about water rights during occupation, especially military occupation. During an occupation, occupying power must ensure the necessities of life, uphold public health and hygiene, and respect mandatory relief season. They must also respect human rights obligation, including the right to safe drinking water. The International Law Commission's principles on the protection of the environment in relation to armed conflict, or PIRAC principles, emphasize that an occupying power shall respect and protect the environment of the occupied territory. Okay, please next slide. After we discuss about IHL to water protect and water rights during the war, on the other hand, there are non-IHL water protection. The UN Security Council adopted resolution 2021 highlighting the severe consequence of damage or destruction to civilians' infrastructure, especially those objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. It recognizes the interconnectedness of essential service and condemns unlawful attacks against and misuse of such objects. Similarly, the anonymously adopted resolution 2018 underscores the centrality of protecting water and water system to address conflict-induced food insecurity. The Geneva List of Principles on the Protection of Water Infrastructure also systematizes the main international rules of water infrastructure and water protection. Okay, please next. Okay, there are biodiversity must be conserved during the war, which means biodiversity who lives in the water, such as coral reefs, invertebrates, fish, and mammals. Okay, please next slide. You guys will discuss about the conclusion with my partner, Bar, so I will pass it to Bar. Okay, go on.
Okay, the conclusion, the damage or destruction of water infrastructure as well as the use of water as means or method of warfare has several direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts. This action deprives civilians of essential resources, destabilizes communities, and exacerbates health and environmental crises. IHL strives to limit the consequences of war and uphold core humanitarian values. This requires strict compliance with IHL in interpreting and applying IHL in good faith and in conformity with the object and purpose of law, adhering to its inherently protecting purpose. Additionally, it's crucial to prevent violence and ensure accountability when they occur. By doing so, we can better protect water and water system and address the urgent needs of affected population. The next slide. Okay, this is resources for this presentation. And if you have some question, you can send to this email. Thank you for your attention. And I think that's all from us. Okay, next slide.
Okay, thank you, Bar. We will pass it to Kenyan Red Cross. They will discuss about the environment and nuclear weapons. Okay, to Kenya Red Cross. Go on.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can.
I can hear you.
So my name is Barry Kumayan, Kenya Red Cross Society youth here in Nairobi. I'm going to take you through three segments: IHL, environment, and the impact of nuclear weapons on environment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to begin with environment impacts. What impact does IHL have on environment? Let's begin with how IHL protects the environment. First, IHL limits damage to a natural environment during war. In Kenya, they have key provisions. To begin with, on Article 35, there's an additional protocol. We have two additional protocols. So the first one prohibits methods of warfare expected to cause widespread, long-term, and severe environmental damages. The second protocol mandates environmental protection and respect for ecosystem during armed conflicts. And why do the two protocols matter? Environmental damage can have long-term humanitarian consequences, such as contaminated water, destroyed farmland, and displacement of wildlife and people. IHL directly protects the environment from widespread, long-term, and severe damage. Next slide, please. So let's see the direct versus the indirect protection of IHL to the environment. The direct protection are supplemented by indirect protections that the environment is provided by IHL. Specifically, the four principles of IHL also provide the environment indirect protection. For example, take the principle of limiting unnecessary suffering. This principle limits the environment from damage by preventing the destruction of natural resources or other environmentally significant areas that would unnecessarily bring suffering to the civilian population during armed conflicts. Next slide, please. So to understand what constitutes widespread, long-term, and severe damage. So in Kenya, our standard of measure, mostly commonly used, is in kilometers. So to begin with, you need to understand 1 kilometer is equal to about 0.62 miles. For reference, several hundred square kilometers is roughly the size of Washington, D.C. I hope you understood, but in case you use miles for measurements. Widespread damage can also be classified as damage that extends beyond the area of conflict zone. Please go to the slide before. To the previous slide, please. To the last statement below, that says widespread damage can also be classified as damage that extends beyond the areas of conflict zones. Some effects cannot be contained. That's why they spill over to the areas that are not even in the conflict zone. Next slide. The long-term damage is generally considered to be damage that lasts a decade or more. These include both direct and indirect effects. For example, a direct effect may be killing crops, but an indirect effect may be the chemical used to kill the crops, seeping into the water supply, contaminating the water in that area. Severe damage is damage that disrupts or damages the ecosystem and harms the health or survival of a population. Okay. So, conflict and environmental impact in Kenya. Kenya has ratified all the 4 Geneva Conventions and the 2 additional protocols I mentioned previously. In Kenya, they recognize environmental protection under IHL Also, Kenya incorporates international treaties into domestic law through Article 2 of the new constitution, of the 2010 constitution. That's our current constitution. Kenya adopted the Environmental and Coordination Act, the MCA, and National Environmental Policy. Due to time, I won't be able to go deeper and explain to you what the acts and the policies entail. Kenya also upholds the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change as well as Convention on Biological Diversity. Kenya generally have never had an international armed conflict. However, we've had violence based on resources, mostly in the Rift Valley and northeastern part of Kenya, whereby those areas of Kenya, they're mostly occupied by pastoralist communities. They have livestock, and due to especially the northeastern part of Kenya, it's very dry, so there's no other any other type of farming. So they mostly keep livestock. In the northeastern of Kenya, they mostly keep camels, and then starts mixing up, coming down to Rift Valley from Lake Turkana down to Masai Mara. Environmental effects of conflicts include deforestation. For example, the Mau Forest. Mau Forest is the Mara River, its source is in Mau. So at some point, it almost dried out because during a conflict in Mau, there was a lot of deforestation. So before last year, that river almost dried out. But now, at least for the last 1 year, it has been raining in that region. So pollution through makeshift weapons and burning. Wildlife displacement and poaching in conflict zones. Also, this wildlife displacement leads to human-wildlife conflicts. At the same time, wild animals tend to have trails. So when the human beings go and live there, or it's fenced out, they'll go to form new trails, probably in populated areas, and so they cause a lot of human wildlife conflict. Another effect of conflicts include water source contamination. I explained that from my previous slide. Let's go on. Now, the obligation of Kenya security forces and military under IHL. The KDF, which is the Kenya Defense Forces, is involved in internal security and cross-border operations. For instance, they have a peacekeeping mission in Somalia called AMISON, established by African Union. They also avoid excessive damage to the environment. They conduct environmental impact assessments before large operations and follow rules of engagement that include environmental precautions. Next slide. Now to the other segments of environment and the nuclear weapons. So the use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict is subject to the core IHL principle of military necessity, distinction, proportionality, and the prohibition on unnecessary suffering. These principles constitute customary IHL, which is binding on all countries, even those that possess nuclear arms. Also, the natural environment is protected from widespread, long-term, and severe damage. Nuclear weapons contaminate the air, land, water, food supply. This has the potential to destroy entire ecosystem, disrupting the delicate natural balance. You can see that in areas that are previously impacted by nuclear weapons. It's okay, we can go to the next slide. So the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. First one is physical impacts on radiation sickness, including nausea, vomiting, skin damage, some type of cancers. Also, psychological impacts of the threat of the nuclear weapons. As the psychological impacts manifest in anxiety, emotional distress, powerlessness, and hopelessness. Now, about the testing of nuclear weapons, there is a treaty that was formed in 1963, and it banned the nuclear testing in atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. That's led to some countries testing their weapons underground, which the testing cannot be contained. Still, the radiation effects can be felt because it's so hard to contain them from escaping into the space, the atmosphere, I mean. So the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty bans all nuclear explosions, whether for military or peaceful purposes. The treaty was signed by 185 countries, but it cannot be an international law because some countries like Egypt, China, Iran, the US, North Korea, Pakistan, and Israel have not entered the treaty, so it cannot be an international law just yet. Several regional treaties also ban testing in Oceania, Africa, Southeastern Asia, Central Asia, Mongolia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Under the regional treaties, no country is allowed to perform nuclear weapon testing in these areas. Next slide, please. The relationship between nuclear weapons and the IHL principles, military necessity. The use of nuclear weapons has very severe and direct effects on the opposing party's military capabilities. However, just because a measure may result in a military objective does not mean that it qualifies as a military necessity. This is especially true when a civilian population will be harmed as a result of military conduct. Civilians are never legitimate to be military targets. As a result, even when directed to accomplish a legitimate military purpose, the widespread effects of nuclear weapons are prohibited by IHL. Given the potential for a catastrophic accident to occur, nuclear power plants are protected as civilian objects and shall not be made the objects of an attack, even if there is a military objective. Nuclear weapons and the 4 IHL principles, proportionality. So the first question is, how does proportionality limit scenarios where nuclear weapons could be used? So using nuclear weapons against military objectives located in or near populated areas would violate the prohibitions of indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks. Even military targets far from cities may fail a proportionality assessment because, like I said before, it's so hard to contain a nuclear weapon. So trying it in an area where it's far from from cities, from populated areas, still it can be carried by wind. So containing the effects is the hardest part, and that's why HL prohibits it. How does proportionality protect nuclear power plants in armed conflicts? Nuclear power plants are often civilian targets with the ability to affect large areas and remove essential electrical supply. Attacking a nuclear power plant would result in a reactor meltdown, which would kill the civilian employees at the plant and impact the surrounding population with radioactive materials. This attack would also poison a nearby water supply and lead to other environmental impacts. Any attack must weigh the collateral damage to the anticipated military damage. Since the damage is so high, most attacks of nuclear power plants will fail the proportionality assessment. Next slide. Sorry, that's Kenyan nuclear weapons. As a proponent of regional disarmament initiatives, Kenya strongly supports the establishment and maintenance of nuclear weapon-free zones. Key challenges in Kenya are about IHL and the environment. Weakened enforcement of IHL and environmental laws during conflict. I can explain to you this. So during conflict, it's normally what happens here. The KDF, the Kenya Defense Forces, will come in, try to restore peace, but the environmental parts will be tried to rescue, do something later. It is very hard to gain resilience of the disasters or hazards. Resource-based conflicts driven by climate stress, floods, and droughts. So during conflict, after, it's during and after as well. But before the drought, the famine hits. And when the farmland is destroyed, so the community can't go back to the normal farming, so they'll depend on government aid. So that sets in, and because it mostly happens in pastoralism, among pastoralism communities, by the time they settle in or they get the aid they need, probably the drought has already hit, or even during the drought that escalates the conflicts, and during floods, because they're very vulnerable and they not have the capacity to cope with whatever hazard that is facing them, it becomes a proper recipe for disaster. Illegal exploitation of resource during instability, such as charcoal trade. It's very common in Mau Forest, especially during conflict. Lack of coordination between defense, environmental, and humanitarian agencies. Mostly during a conflict, it's the defense that go in, restore peace. Then later, it's when the environment part and the humanitarian agencies can be part of the process during conflict, but the environmental part will come later. Recommendation for Kenyans: strengthen military training on IHL and environmental law, so that while restoring peace, they also have in mind IHL and the environmental law. Include environmental protocols in all peacekeeping and counter-insurgency operations. Encourage community-led conversation in conflict-prone areas. When such a conversation is coming within that community, it will be more effective than the government just going in, and it would feel like they're being forced to do that. Establish an interagency task force, like the Ministry of Defense. NEMA is National Environment Management Authority. KWS is Kenya Wildlife Service, and the NGOs continue support nuclear weapon free zones. Thank you so much. If you have any question, please send to that email. Next, Canada.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And can you folks hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin, and I work as a training and education coordinator on the IHL team at the Canadian Red Cross. I'll turn my camera on at the end of my presentation so you can see my face, but I'll have it off for now just to avoid any lagging or delays. So today I will be discussing sexual gender-based violence during wartime. I do want to also express, just as a disclosure, that this can be a heavy and triggering topic. So if you do need to step away at any moment from the Zoom, please feel free to do so as well. This is a safe space, but let's go ahead and get going. So next slide, please. Perfect. Just for the sake of time, we can go ahead and skip to the next slide and just get right into the content. Okay, so what is gender-based violence? So under IHL, sexual violence is defined as acts of sexual nature imposed by force or coercion, such as that caused by fear of violence, duress, detention, psychological oppression, or abuse of power directed against any victim, man, woman, boy, or girl. Taking advantage of a coercive environment or of the victim's incapacity to give genuine consent is also a form of coercion. It has been recognized that rape and other forms of sexual violence are prohibited under customary international humanitarian law. It can also qualify as a war crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court when committed as part of a plan or policy or as part of a large-scale commission of such crimes. And next slide, please. Okay, so who are the victims of gender-based violence? So the victims go from boys and girls, men and women, to us LGBTQ plus individuals, as well as combatants, army, military, civilians, etc. Really, anyone can be a victim of gender-based violence. Despite clear legal prohibitions, sexual violence remains widespread and prevalent during armed conflicts and other situations of violence, as well as in detention. It does also occur in various contexts and has grave humanitarian consequences. Sexual violence is often utilized as a tactical and strategic means of overwhelming and weakening the adversary, whether directly or indirectly, by targeting the civilian population. Sexual violence is rarely an isolated issue, and it's usually a pattern of violence linked to other violations of IHL, such as torture, killings, looting, child recruitment, or destruction of property. When linked to situations of conflict, it can exacerbate existing sexual and gender-based violence such as marital rape and child marriage among civilians. These factors may also lead to the emergence of new trends or patterns, such as transactional or survival sex and trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation or abuse. And next slide, please. Perfect. So, how does armed conflict affect boys and girls, men and women, and gender diverse peoples? Well, women and girls can often be particularly vulnerable when war breaks out because of their often disadvantaged position in society. So, when women are more likely to be poor, have less access to education and employment, less mobility because of traditional societal and reproductive roles. Some recognized ways that women experience the effects of conflict include having to take on the role of household earner, being forced to offer sex for survival, greater risk of getting pregnant and contracting HIV, facing increased tensions in gender relations, as well as increasingly being victimized by domestic violence during times of conflict. Often we see that women's needs are neglected during emergencies and conflicts. So, for example, the lack of healthcare facilities for all. However, women and girls are often disproportionately affected, with lack of reproductive being an example as well. Women and children often account for a majority of displaced persons, and some of these factors may lead to higher rates of death and illness during armed conflict. Men can also be affected by conflict in other ways. So, aside from women, it does affect men as well. And this can also be under recognized. So, by example, sexual violence. There are also differences in how women and men suffer violence during war. Men are often more likely to be directly impacted by warfare, and men and boys are more likely to be perceived as combatants and may be more vulnerable to attack. In some cases, parties to a conflict may open humanitarian corridors that only allow women and children to pass through, whereas with men and boys, they may also be more likely to be subjected to drafts or forced recruitment and face challenges of reintegrating into communities post-conflict. And next slide, please. Fantastic. How does dealing or not dealing with IHL violations affect the well-being of a society during and after armed conflict? Well, women, in addition to men, actively participate in conflict, and the number of women engaged in combat has increased. So, if we look at the rise in numbers, it has led to the increased importance of protections afforded to women as combatants and prisoners of war under IHL. Geneva Conventions and additional protocols reinforce the concept of equality. And for women who are prisoners of war, women are obliged to receive treatment as favorable as that granted to men as well. Now, while IHL might ensure equality, it is recognized that women fighters may face additional social pressures during and post conflict. So, in some cases, women soldiers may struggle to reintegrate into their communities due to gender expectations. So, for example, one study of the experiences of female soldiers in Africa found that women faced challenges reintegrating into their communities due to several factors, including a reluctance to conform to traditional gender roles, changing roles within their families, being childless, or returning with disabilities and injuries resulting from war, which may also affect their opportunities for marriage as well. And next slide, please. Okay, so on to prosecuting perpetrators of sexual gender-based violence. So during the prosecution of individuals prosecuted before the International Criminal Court, victims of sexual violence benefit from additional measures of protection. So, rules of procedure have been implemented regarding evidence in cases of sexual violence, and no corroboration is required to prove crimes of sexual violence before the International Criminal Court. Consent also cannot be inferred in the following cases. So, when the victim's ability to give genuine consent was undermined by force or coercion, when the victim was incapable of giving genuine consent, or when the victim remained silent or lacked resistance as well. IHL contains a general prohibition of discrimination, which includes discrimination based on gender. This prohibition applies both to international armed conflicts as well as to non international armed conflicts. Additionally, women do benefit a special protection against any attack on their honor, in particular against rape, enforced prostitution, or any form of indecent assault. When they are pregnant or in labor, women are entitled additional protections and considerations, depending on the situation they find themselves in as well. When they are detained, women must be treated with all the regard due to their sex and be confined in quarters separate from men, except for civilians who are accommodated with their families. Pregnant civilians' care is also prioritized when they are made internees, and parties to a conflict must try to release, repatriate, or return them. According to international humanitarian law, the death penalty may not be carried out against pregnant women or mothers of young or dependent children as well. Okay, and next slide, please. Perfect. So, how do we improve the humanitarian response? So, to address the issues identified and improve the humanitarian response, there must be a recognition that women, men, and children are uniquely affected by war, and that in many and most societies, women are already vulnerable pre conflict and disproportionately impacted by war. Often, attempts at gender mainstreaming are done through seeking a gender balance. However, the inclusion of more women does not necessarily achieve the application of a gender perspective in operations or activities and should be thought of as one strategy to complement other considerations as well. So, for example, it is possible for a male dominated industry or organization, such as the armed forces, to incorporate a gender perspective without a true gender balance. Those involved with the humanitarian response to conflict must also be conscious of their own gender perspectives and biases. A gender perspective should also be integrated into all aspects of humanitarian, developmental, and military operations, which includes peacekeeping and the drafting of military manuals. Commissions investigating situations of armed conflicts should also include gender aspects in the process, as well as in the review of new weapons. Gender perspectives also must be intersectional and or contextualized as well, and multiple aspects of identity must be recognized and considered. People experience identity through gender, race, class, sexuality, age, and ability simultaneously, and notions of gender are always impacted by other aspects of our identity as well. The unique needs of women and men must be properly addressed at all stages of a humanitarian response. So, for example, there must be an absolute recognition that if there is a conflict, there are victims of sexual violence. Services to respond to the needs of these victims must be part of the standard humanitarian response without being specifically requested. There has been a greater awareness of some of the logistical considerations in the delivery of aid as well. So, for example, challenging the tradition of distributing food and basic supplies to refugee populations through male leaders and recognizing that supplies may be more fairly distributed through women. The consideration of gender roles in specific situations is also necessary. So, another example is that a study in the late 1990s found that some Somali female refugees were going hungry because they feared being raped while collecting firewood needed to cook their meals. In this case, the location of firewood was impacting the health and safety of female refugees, however, not for men. One strategy of the international community is the development of legal instruments, so including soft law, to better protect vulnerable populations, including women. This is done in form of standards, guidelines, and resolutions. So, for example, a great example of this is a series of Security Council resolutions have been adopted to protect women and children from sexual violence during armed conflict. Finally, just to close off on that positive note as well, all types of gender based violence must be prosecuted. So, victims must have access to justice and the right to remedy and reparations. All right, and thank you so much. I am just closing off, so you can just go ahead to the next slide. Perfect, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me present at this wonderful event. I will pass it off to our Ukraine team.
Yep. Hello, colleagues. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. My name is Dmytro Kirichenko. I am the representative of the organization, which is not quite a one from the international movement of Red Cross and Red Crescent. However, me myself, with a background working as IHL coordinator at the Ukrainian Red Cross Society. So it's actually a truly an honor to be here, representing one of the largest civil use society organizations in Kiev, capital of Ukraine. I'm also here to share some reflections of mine on perspective of international humanitarian law, but um, from the perspective of meanings behind it, more than from the perspective of legal aspects and rules and principles, as long as my topic sounds as how young people you should be involved and why, and whether should or not at all into the IHL work. So before that, allow me to extend my deep gratitude to Kara and to American Red Cross team for organizing this event possible. We deeply believe that every effort to build global connection deserve prize, but this seminar is especially urgent and necessary. So thank you very much for making it happen. It's really wonderful. As young advocates for humanity, we're not just participants in such kind of discussions, but as well we are stakeholders of the results of such discussions. And actually, I now have for the last maybe year, I have a small souvenir from the American Red Cross, as you can see here. Even war has rules. It's a very symbolic thing for me. It's just wanted to share this nice moment. So, the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. A couple of words about what do we do and what is our stance as a Kyiv Youth City Council. So, as one of the largest unions of youth organizations in Kyiv, we serve as institutional voice for democratic youth and as support structure for youth civic movements in the capital. We are local branch of National Youth Council of Ukraine, the only organization with full membership in European Youth Forum, which makes us quite a good voice for young society of activists in Kyiv. We unite over 20 member organizations from Ukrainian scouts and youth groups of national minorities and emerging artists. So, and our mission is to strengthen democracy through sustainable partnerships. We work as well internationally, cooperating with sister cities like Hamburg, for example, and we yesterday had a wonderful meeting with Hamburg. So, I'm saying this just to prove that my position here is quite a position of young society. So, today I want to explore the meaning of role of IHL from several of my perspectives. First of all, as international lawyer, then as a IHL coordinator from former IHL coordinator from Ukrainian Red Cross Society, as an active member of Youth Society, and most personally as a citizen of a country at war. So, I believe when we talk about international humanitarian law, we talk not simply about norms, but about something deeper and behind those norms. The conversation is not just about rules of war, but about our shared values, and I do deeply believe in it. And the world today is it's quite difficult, as you may see, and uncertain. And in such circumstances, international humanitarian law serves not just a base and a body of law, but as a few of remaining frameworks that helps us speak about protection of dignity and preservation of democratic values that are under pressure. That is a very important essence of international humanitarian law as well, just to go beyond the legal aspect of it. Yes, obviously, it's a legal framework designed to limit the damages of war, and the wonderful remarks of my colleagues previously delved into the nuanced aspects of it. But depending on different perspective, it means different things. For example, from military command and chain of command, it's definitely the set of obligatory rules which should be well abide by. But for, let's say, IHL trainer, it's not the set of rules, it's more the like basis of knowledge. It's knowledge that should be transferred and disseminated. And for a civil society, it's a moral institution to uphold, and we deeply believe in it. And its roots, purpose of IHL is not merely to constrain wartime conduct. However, it is the one of the primary goal. It's to protect what remains human in the most inhuman conditions. Its development actually from early stages of what should have been called as laws of war and then developed into modern understanding of international humanitarian law. It's actually the depiction of development of our society as a whole. And it's very important to understand that international humanitarian law is some sort of cast of our society, our global society, and that values we actually carry with ourselves. But what is the most hard here is that this progress cannot be taken for granted. Today, we don't actually live anymore in the world of uncertain tomorrow. We live in the world of uncertain today. And at this present moment, international law and democratic order face serious threats. And in moments like this, the relevance of IHL does not fade, but gets even higher besides being challenged. And here I want to be very clear and very transparent, and I believe you will agree with me to some extent. Now it's becoming harder and harder to speak and to talk about IHL with people. Sometimes being extremely frank, it's even hard to talk about IHL with yourselves. With the smallest or the most brutal or the minor breach of international humanitarian law, such violations erodes trust. And that erosion is not accidental. I do believe it's fueled by autocratic sentiment that seek to dismantle the norms of global order. That is precisely why defending IHL is not just about legal principles, but about resisting the normalization of war. That's what IHL as well, not just regulating it, but resisting normalization of it. And here actually it's where the use component steps in. And please, next slide. Here, having laid this wide network of why international humanitarian law wide background is not just about a system of norms, but actually something more behind it. It's the system of values we actually believe in and upon which our world is built on. And as young people, we are inheriting this world. As volunteers, we have to shape it. And from this perspective, engage in IHL related work is not optional, it's something essential because it protects the world we have to live in and the better version of this world. Well, IHL should not be exclusive domain of ministries of defense or let's say legal scholars. It must also live in the fabric of our minds and actually in minds of citizens because it's something that we need to keep in mind living in this world full of challenges. In Ukraine, for example, getting to more practical aspects, it's not a theory at all, as you may know. We have seen it at work, me personally from the work with the international Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and within the civil society. And within the civil society, which is very interesting and peculiar about our situation, a lot of young people are not only advocates, but active agents of resistance and resilience. And many of us, I believe, both here and in Ukraine and in this call, wear many hats and have many roles. For example, speaking about the chairperson of Kyiv City Youth Council, he is an active serviceman and he's actually present here at this call. His name is Vadim Bratchikov. He's defending democracy on all possible levels, on the battle of military side and on the battle of civilian side. So this is where IHL becomes not just the part of military effort of something else, but when it becomes actually the part of the world we're trying to build it together and to defend together. So, and this convergence of military and civilian, individual and collective makes the nature and necessity of IHL the most evident. The IHL team does, for example, speaking of what is actually being done, the IHL team in Ukrainian Red Cross Society, which I used to be a part, doing tremendous work and disseminating knowledge. And that is actually what we can do as a civil society, disseminate, explain, give our perspectives of on this matter, and try to persuade people in understanding that it's not something that applies only to those combatants or people engaged in actions. It's something that goes beyond and beyond, and it's something that is the flagship of our world. Speaking of formats and forms, that is the most interesting part because as long as the only tool is dissemination, it goes by different names and forms and shapes. Me personally, I'm a huge fan of what American Red Cross does. You guys have this series of videos on IHL, obviously based on plots of some popular films, movies, and TV shows. It's just magnificent. It's the best way of showcasing how and what we actually can do as a society, as a global society, because being here signifies that we are the part of some society, and the role of the society, we do deeply believe, is to protect what we still have left. And please, next slide, if possible. Yeah, and here I want to end on this high note, I believe. So to highlight what this my long, maybe a little bit eccentric, maybe a little bit vague speech was meant to say. IHL is not about weapons. IHL is about values, and these values, especially those forged in conflicts, must be protected with big attention to creativity and with collective effort. Thank you very much. It's a big pleasure, and now I'm glad to pass the word to my colleague and a very good friend of mine from Ukrainian Red Cross, Ruslana.
Hi, so Ruslana is, she was here earlier, but she did have to leave because she is at a conference right now in Bosnia. So I will just briefly be going over her slides, and to the entire Kyiv Youth Council, if at any point you want to jump in and say anything, you guys probably know this content better than I do. So please feel free to come off mute at any moment and say anything, but I will briefly be going off of this beautiful presentation that Ruslana made. Yes, so we will begin. So the Ukrainian Red Cross presentation is on Red Cross emblem protection. And so the Red Cross emblem is the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, and then you can also see here the Red Crystal. The three of them are seen on this first slide. And the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, and the Red Crystal emblems provide protection for medical personnel of the armed forces, military chaplains, and persons and objects belonging to the international movement. And this is protected by not just international humanitarian law, but also in Ukraine specifically, there are a few laws in the law of Ukraine and in the criminal code of Ukraine from 2001 that encode this into their law there specifically. So why is it important to protect the emblem? So there's a couple of reasons why it's important. Diminishing the emblem's protective and special force can erode trust in the institution of the American Red Cross and the Red Crescent. It can have negative consequences for wounded and sick combatants and for those who are providing military medical services. It can have negative consequences for civilian populations at the front line and elsewhere. And it can increase the administrative and operational burden of the Red Cross, which adversely affects the provision of humanitarian relief to those in need. So this is especially an issue in Ukraine right now, as more than 20 Ukrainian Red Cross buildings and vehicles that have the Red Cross emblem have been damaged in recent years. And we can see some photos here of buildings and vehicles that have the Red Cross emblem that have been targeted and damaged. So emblem misuse is often seen with medical and cosmetic products. And we're going to see a couple of examples of that in a moment. But emblem misuse, for all the reasons that were just mentioned 2 slides ago, it can really erode trust and it can erode the mission, the humanitarian mission of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. And so here are some examples of emblem misuse. You can see that, this is on folders and flyers and things that are not directly related to medical personnel within the Ukrainian Red Cross, and they're not medical vehicles. So here we can see some vehicles with misuse that have been reported on vehicles connected to humanitarian aid. A couple of more examples that Ruslana put together. So there is this, a couple of ways that emblem protections that the emblem can be protected. So there's Red Cross emblem protection trainings, which provide materials about the proper use of Red Cross emblems. And then there's direct and indirect violations. So sometimes people don't know that they're violating the use of the Red Cross emblems. And so that is part of why this education can be really important. There's also modules on Red Cross emblem training for different IHL sessions, as well as IHL courses. And there's public campaigns about the Red Cross emblem, collaboration with government authorities, and collaboration with other national societies. And all of these different collaborations are an attempt to help make sure that the Red Cross emblem is preserved and used in the way that it's intended to be used. So we can see here there's some data on information and misuse and use of where we see a lot of these emblem misuse and proper use. So currently there has been, this is a graph of the status of misuse cases that are being investigated right now in Ukraine. And so 26 of them have been resolved or changes made. 7 of them have been resolved without changes being made. We have a couple of them that have been transferred to other authorities, and then 6 of them are cross-border cases that are being, multiple national societies are working on those cases. So here's some revised cases where we can see the change between this is not before we have the Red Cross emblem here, and then it changes to not to be a Red Cross emblem anymore, but it just is indicating that this is medical supplies and this is a medical logo. And so that was the intention before, was that it would be indicating that this is medical supplies, but it was probably unintentional emblem misuse. And so we can see there's this nice correction here, just to make sure that that emblem is being used in the correct ways and in compliance with international humanitarian law. So here's some other examples of revised cases. Again, this is indicating that this is medical gear. And so the change from the Red Cross to the Blue Cross. Yes, so there is also some criminal proceedings under Article 445 of the Criminal Code, and this is related to the prosecution of misuse of emblems. And the Ukrainian Red Cross has published this up-to-date collection of key sources on the use and protection of the Red Cross emblem in Ukraine. And this book can be found online. It's from 2024, so it is quite up to date. If anyone is interested in reading it, it is free to download online, and you can learn much more in depth than we've gone today about the Red Cross emblem and about proper and improper use of the Red Cross emblem. So yes, there's been a lot of information and a lot of presentations that have been done in Ukraine on how to brief Ukrainian for like media presentations, journalists, the public on the history of the Red Cross emblem and its distinctive and proper function, and how it actually is a symbol that has legal ramifications, and it can't just be put on anything, because it can sometimes be seen as just a general medical emblem, but it actually has legal protections and proper uses. And so there's also been a lot of presentations done at libraries and cooperation with the libraries in Ukraine to try to disseminate information about the Red Cross emblem, to increase access to information and try to make sure that when civilians see misuse of the emblem, that they know how to report it, and how everyone can get that issue addressed, just for everyone's general safety, especially for civilians. When the emblem is misused, it can put civilians at risk. And Ukraine has a quite extensive social media presence. Speaking about the emblem protection, they have an entire course on emblem protection, and I can put more information about that in the chat in just a moment, because I have a link that Rusana sent me. And yeah, these are a couple of examples of like social media campaigns showing examples of use and misuse of the emblem. So the need for collective action in the use of the Red Cross emblem, Rusana gave a couple of examples here. So identify third-party organizations that use the emblem and help these organizations to avoid unauthorized use. Intensify the protection of emblems within different respective territories. Engage in dialogue with relevant authorities, so law enforcement, Red Cross, Red Crescent, ICRC, and create and coordinate emblem protection campaigns and events. So thank you for your attention. And again, if the Kyiv Youth Council would like to add anything, please feel free. Okay, and if there are no other comments, I will pass it over to the American Red Cross team for our final presentation, which is going to be on IHL in space.
Hi everyone, so today we're going to be presenting the IHL in space. So my name is Diana Nicoleta Escalera. I am a actively the Volunteer Reconnection and Appreciation Lead in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Now I'll pass it on to Symmetry.
Hi everyone, my name is Smriti Muralidhar. I just this past year I joined as a Northwest Region Youth Action Campaign advocate for international humanitarian law, and I live in Washington State.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah. I am an advocate in the Southwest and Rocky Mountain Division of the United States, and I'm really excited to be here.
Okay, so first we have a little bit of a debrief of the history of humanity in space. First, in 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first spacecraft into space. Then, in 1961, Russia sent the first human in space. In 1963, Neil Armstrong becomes the first man on the moon. In 1976, NASA's Viking I becomes the first spacecraft to land on Mars. In 1998, the first piece of International Space Station was launched. In 2009 and 10, SpaceX becomes the first non-governmental organization to launch a spacecraft and return safely to Earth. And finally, in 2024, over 9,000 active and over 3,000 inactive satellites orbit the Earth. Now we have military operations in space. In 1957, the first ballistic missile is tested in outer space. Then in 1959, the US launches the first ASAT test. In 1975, a cannon aboard the secret Soviet mission was fired remotely while in orbit. Then in 2007, China enters the ASAT race by destroying an old weather satellite. In 2019, the US establishes the Space Force as our sixth branch in the military. And finally, in 2024, Russia is suspected of planning to launch a nuclear weapon into the orbit. Okay, so satellites for military uses. The military typically uses satellites for intelligence and surveillance, for early warning system like detecting missiles, for navigations like GPS, communications, data network that allows enemies to issue commands. Targeting satellite information is used to deploy ground forces and fire communications. Then we have civilian uses. We have telecommunications, broadcasting, internet, telephone and television services, navigation and transportation, GPS for cars, airplanes, and ships. War is already being waged in space, and like land and sea warfare must be governed by laws. The 1991 Gulf War is considered the first space war due to the use of satellites for navigation, enemy troop tracking, and missile warnings. Some satellites are dual use, serving both military and civilian purposes, and require rules on targeting. Space objects are good targets due to their limited number, predictable paths, high cost, and vulnerability. However, destroying them creates dangerous debris that can harm people, the environment, and infrastructure. Therefore, a legal framework is necessary to manage space conflicts and their consequences on Earth. Now I'll pass it on to Symmetry.
All right, so what is space law? Space law is a robust framework of international treaties, agreements, and conventions to govern the use of and activities occurring in outer space. So most do not specify application during an armed conflict, but the language and coverage is pretty broad. So international humanitarian law applies during armed conflict on Earth, seas, and outer space. Some types of space conflicts are those that are entirely in space, space-based with ground effects, and ground to space. So here are some international treaties and space laws. There is the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty, which prohibits testing nuclear weapons and explosions in the atmosphere and outer space. There is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which provides a framework for international actions in space and a set of core principles. The 1968 Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts, and the Return of Objects launched into outer space ensures that the signatory states will take all possible steps to rescue and assist astronauts in distress and promptly return them to the state that launched them. The 1972 Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects is another international treaty in space law. The 1976 Convention on Registration of Objects Launched in Outer Space requires signatory parties to create registries to identify objects launched into space, whether it's done through governmental or non-governmental entities. And then lastly, the 1984 Agreement governing the activities of states on the moon and other celestial bodies sought stricter regulations of conduct in outer space regarding the moon and other celestial bodies, and it was drafted by the international community to reaffirm the principles of the Outer Space Treaty. I will pass it on to Sarah.
Thank you so much. So, how does IHL apply in space? International humanitarian law, or IHL, applies to all types of warfare, regardless of the weapon used or the domain it takes place in. So that means that it not only covers land, sea, and air warfare, but it also covers future conflicts that could occur in space. So even though space seems kind of distant, if a space-based attack impacts civilians directly or indirectly, IHL does still apply. So how do we apply the IHL principles in space? So to apply IHL in space, we use the same core principles that guide warfare on Earth. The first is military necessity, which is any action must serve a legitimate military purpose. So objects like hospitals or even the Hubble Space Telescope can't be targeted because they provide no military advantage. The second is distinction, which is there must be a clear separation between civilian and military objects. The third is proportionality. So this basically means that the damage caused by an attack must not outweigh its expected military benefit. And the fourth is unnecessary suffering. So even though space-based warfare is rare, any weapon launched from space, so chemical weapons, etc., must comply with IHL. And launching such weapons onto Earth would be illegal because it does cause unnecessary harm. So how do we apply IHL to the environment? So even though outer space treaties don't directly address environmental protection, IHL does step in to fill that gap because the rules of IHL still do apply to armed conflict in space. That conflict can have serious effects on Earth's environment. And so IHL prohibits any method of warfare that causes widespread, long-term, or severe environmental damage. And this language appears across many legal provisions, and it's important because it helps ensure that even in space warfare, we consider the long-term impact of IHL in space on our planet. So environmental IHL protections, the key treaty that protects the environment is the 1977 Environmental Modification Convention, which bans using environmental changes as a method of warfare. We're going to look at some additional articles, such as Additional Protocol 1, specifically Articles 35.3 and 55.1, which directly address environmental protection during armed conflict. But it is important to note that Protocol 1 only applies when two state parties are at war. And in contrast, Protocol 2, which covers conflicts involving non-state actors, only offers indirect protections for the environment. So understanding the differences between these protocols helps us see how IHL can really limit environmental damage even in outer space conflicts. So the 1977 Environmental Modification Convention was created to stop the use of environment itself as a weapon. It bans any deliberate attempts to change the natural environment in ways that cause widespread, long-lasting, or severe damage. It's important to note that this doesn't apply to peaceful scientific activities. It really only restricts harmful uses during warfare. So, Additional Protocol 1, Article 35.3, this is one of the key provisions recognizing the need to protect the environment during armed conflict. It specifically prohibits the use of any kind of weapons or tactics that are intended or even just expected to cause widespread, long-term, or severe environmental damage. And I think what's especially important here is the wording "or may be expected," because this means that even if the damage wasn't intentional, if it was foreseeable, states can still be held accountable. So Additional Protocol 1, Article 55.1, this builds on the previous article by placing a clear responsibility on states. It requires them to ensure that their military actions do not cause widespread, long-term, or severe harm to the environment, especially when that harm could threaten the health or survival of the civilian population. And then this article also includes the phrase "or may be expected to cause," which kind of highlights the idea of foreseeability. In other words, states can't really avoid responsibility just because the damage wasn't intentional. If the harm was likely to happen, it is still accountable. I'm now going to go ahead and pass it back to Smriti.
Thanks, Sarah. So, does IHL only apply to the military or governmental bodies? Absolutely not. So, it also applies to private actors and non-governmental organizations. So, probably a big prominent one that we can think of when talking about space is SpaceX. That is a huge private actor in space, and international humanitarian law definitely applies to them as well. So, there are two main principles that sort of guide the behavior of these private actors in terms of IHL. And the first one is, while the activity is being done by the private actor, the state, that is the government, is still responsible. So just because the NGO or the private actor is working on something, it does not absolve the state from responsibility. And the second one is that private actors must minimize harm when working to help society, and this is also known as corporate social responsibility. So IHL in and of itself is pretty robust, but are there any gaps in the IHL space law? So consider the following. Think about if the existing framework can address debris-causing events, like the testing of anti-satellite weapons. Another thing to think about is the potential policy implications if scientific vessels with soldiers on board are considered as legitimate military targets. And then lastly, evolutions in IHL arising in the wake of conflict rather than acting now. This is sort of something that we see throughout history in a variety of topics where we wait for an event to happen or we wait for a conflict to happen and then make preventative measures after that. So it is our job to put measures in place now to protect our safety and uphold humanitarianism. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at a case study to apply our knowledge of IHL in space. So this case study is about two states, Ryloth and Tatooine, which are engaged in an international armed conflict. Each state owns ASAT weapons, which are capable of disabling, jamming, or destroying enemy space objects. However, Tatooine's military recently found that Ryloth has launched a rocket into space containing a nuclear warhead. Now, Ryloth has stated that the weapon is for defensive and deterrent purposes. So we have a couple questions. Did Ryloth violate any international treaties by launching a nuclear weapon into space? Think about that for a little. So yes, it did. It violated the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which clearly forbids placing weapons of mass destruction in orbit. Now, if Ryloth detonated a nuclear weapon in space, even as a test, would it violate any other treaties or principles? Yes, it would. Ryloth would violate the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty if it detonated a nuclear weapon in space, and this clearly expressly prohibits such action. Okay. Now, let's say that Tatooine is planning an attack on one of Ryloth's satellites, which is currently being used by the Ryloth military to monitor enemy troops and communicate. Now, this satellite also serves a civilian function. It provides high-speed internet connection to civilian buildings, one of which is a hospital. Now, because the position of its troops is compromised, Tatooine is unable to carry out effective military operations. Now, this satellite also lies in close proximity to a space station of a third state, the Naboo. So this is a state that's not involved in the conflict. Now, blowing up the satellite with a kinetic strike would create debris, which would destroy the Naboo space station and also might kill the astronauts on board. So, does targeting the satellite violate the principle of distinction? No. As long as the satellite makes an ongoing contribution to military and their operations, the distinction principle is being met. So the Rylot satellite in this example is monitoring enemy troops and communicates by relaying their position to remote piloted drones. So it is serving that military function, so the principle of distinction would be met. Now, if not, which it is not, how can Tatooine target the satellite without violating the proportionality principle? So Tatooine can do this by using a non-kinetic strike, which only disables the military portion of a satellite. Now, this will uphold the principle of proportionality. Some examples of non-kinetic strikes would be electromagnetic interference, cyber attacks, and directed energy systems. Okay, thank you so much for your time. We hope you enjoy learning about IHL in space. Here are our emails. I'm going to pass it over to Kara now.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and present about the IHL Youth Action Campaign super quick. This is the reason that we are able to really do events like this, and why we are able to gather so many people together to be able to present about IHL and things like that. But briefly wanted to share what an amazing program this is. The International Humanitarian Law Youth Action Campaign is an American Red Cross program that encourages youth and young adult teams aged 13 to 24 to learn about IHL and empower them to explore these laws through peer-to-peer campaigns. So the program is built around 3 core pillars, which is to educate, engage, and empower. You learn about the core concepts of international humanitarian law. You raise awareness about an IHL topic by designing a peer-to-peer educational campaign, and then you empower. You become leaders in IHL discourse and inform the public about the law of war. So I'm not going to read all of the components of the program, but there are many amazing opportunities that you can receive through this program, and also a lot of learning opportunities as well. You learn how to build a successful campaign, and you learn how to implement a campaign on a specific theme as well, because the IHL Youth Action Campaign has a specific theme every year. And then you receive so many amazing opportunities through the campaign as well, such as the summit in Washington, D.C., that some outstanding advocates have the chance to receive the opportunity for. And aside from the summit in Washington, you receive many opportunities regionally, nationally, and even internationally, such as this call. So if any of you, regardless of where you are interested in learning about the program, please email any of the 3 emails below, and we would be happy to connect you and set you up and talk about how we can implement that. I'm going to pass it back to Kara.
You are muted, Kara.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that wonderful explanation of the IHL YAC program. I hope some of you are maybe interested in participating in the program or just interested in learning more about it. Really briefly before we close, I did want to mention that Diane and I are working on a project, really she's leading it, on creating an international youth database. So if you're interested in learning more about events like this, or if you want to host an event like this, be part of events that we're doing in the future, please consider scanning the QR code. There will also be a link in the chat. We're not sharing your information with anyone, and we won't send you emails. We'll just reach out when there's events similar to this. So if you're interested in that, definitely consider putting your information into the QR code so that we have a way to contact you and we know that you're interested. And lastly, I just want to thank every single person for coming to this today, whether you were a panelist or you were viewing. I am so honored that I got the opportunity to teach so many people about IHL over the course of this program. And I'm so honored that all of the countries that were here today trusted me with this project that, hadn't been done before and allowed me to teach some IHL, took the leap of faith in doing this project with me. I'm so thankful, and I'm so thankful for everyone who came. I really hope you enjoyed this and you learned something new. There will be a recording of this available on YouTube soon if you want to go back and review a certain section, or if maybe you want to do an event where you stream this for a YAC team or something like that. Yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day or evening. We have a lot of time zones, so wherever you are, I hope your day or tomorrow is really wonderful.